just a few pieces of householding. As our attendees come in, you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A box and a chat box. So any questions you have about today's webinar on food waste recycling, our report launch for ADPA, you can ask those questions in the Q&A, and our speakers will do their best to answer them. I'll also download the questions afterwards and can help facilitate any answering after the event. And if you had any comments to leave or links or any further information that the other participants could follow up on, do feel free to click on the speech bubble at the bottom of the screen to say chat, and you can speak to the other participants that way. And I will now hand over to Charlotte, our meeting moderator.
You're on mute, Charlotte.
Good job I asked whether everyone could hear me successfully, because obviously you couldn't. So thanks for that. So good morning, everyone. I'm Charlotte Morton. I'm the Chief Executive of ADPA, and I'm delighted to welcome you this morning to the launch of our latest report on food waste recycling. Data makes it very clear that food waste is a huge problem that needs to be addressed urgently. It goes without saying that throwing away food when we have so many hungry people close to where that food is scandalous. But we also need to appreciate the scale of the resources that go into producing that food. Vast quantities of fertilizers, agricultural land, water, energy, financial resources, and of course human resources. All these go into producing food, which we then throw away. The statistics are shocking. Approximately 1/3 to a half of all the food that we produce is wasted. It's been estimated that if food loss and waste were a country, it would be the third highest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions after the USA and China. And if that weren't bad enough, half of all the land that we use to grow food is suffering from severe loss of nutrients and organic carbon to the soil. This is a critical long-term problem for the sustainability of our farming, although the tragic situation in Ukraine highlights that it is in fact not so long-term. On a more positive note, a waste hierarchy has been developed for food waste. And of course, prevention is at the top of that hierarchy. Everywhere in the world, local authorities can work on prevention, which is the most preferable option when it comes to food waste, of course. RAP quoted a statistic many years ago that preventing food waste was 8 times better even than AD. And yes, there is something even better than AD. Not producing food that we throw away in the first place and not throwing it away in the second place is the biggest single contribution we can make to reducing the environmental impacts of food waste. The second best option is separating out food that is still edible and redistributing it to people who are hungry nearby. There are now many thousands of examples of non-governmental organisations and charities working with food retailers and wholesalers to take food away shortly before or on its sell-by date to feed it to the homeless or the growing number of people who are struggling to feed themselves. If edible food cannot be sent to people, then under the hierarchy, it should then be sent to animals. But if it cannot be sent to either, then it should be recycled, which is where our industry comes in to turn what most people now consider to be problematic waste, and indeed without recycling, food waste starts emitting harmful methane emissions, into valuable green energy, bio-CO2, natural fertilizers, and other valuable bioresources. One further point to note is that the value of managing this food waste properly, when food waste is collected in our kitchen caddies or in commercial kitchens, we all start to see much more clearly what we are putting in those caddies. And more often than not, when we see that we are in fact throwing away food that is still edible, that's when we can take steps to reduce it. And the evidence from Wales and other places suggests that just by collecting food waste in this way, a further reduction in food waste arisings can be achieved of around 12%. That's a big number. But once we've reduced food waste as much as possible, then we still need to recycle what's left. And AD is currently the technology that gets by far the most out of it, and ensuring that we turn it into valuable resources. Some of you might not be familiar with anaerobic digestion, so let me first give you a quick overview of this natural process. Hopefully you all know that you have been anaerobically digesting your breakfast this morning. Anaerobic digestion is a technology that's been around for millennia and is widely used across the UK and indeed the rest of the world. It simply recycles organic wastes into renewable energy, taking the energy that's been captured in the plant material from the sun's rays, turning it into biogas, which is effectively CO2 and methane, same as natural gas, or biomethane, and creating the biogas, the bio-CO2, a rich in nutrient, soil restoring biofertilizer, and other valuable bioproducts that are used across a variety of industries. So AD has a key role to play in the creation of a circular economy and indeed in the energy transition. Food waste contains a huge proportion of water, and burning water is not sensible. So incinerating food waste is indeed a waste, but it's still better than sending food waste to landfill, where it will, as I said earlier, emit harmful methane emissions. In the past year, this potent greenhouse gas has captured the attention of world leaders. The Global Methane Assessment, published by the Climate and Clean Air Coalition last year, has demonstrated that tackling methane caused by human activity is the most immediate and cost-effective way to keep global warming below 2 degrees C. Globally, organic wastes, including food waste, manures, agricultural wastes, and wastewater, are responsible for about 20% of total methane emissions. However, of the 9.5 million tonnes of food wasted each year in the UK, only a fraction is anaerobically digested, with the rest either left to emit methane directly into the atmosphere or treated through less efficient processes such as incineration. It's estimated that in 2019, 2.7 million tonnes of solid food waste got sent to AD. However, the industry's current capacity for food waste is 3.2 million tonnes. And that's expected to increase sharply with the introduction of universal food waste collections by 2023. So it's now critical that these are rolled out and designed well. And that's why we've produced the report we're launching today, to help local authorities who are making decisions about the recycling of their food waste. Our lead analyst, Leanne Williams, who co-wrote the report, will take you through it, and she will be joined by David McKee, the CTO of BioCapital, Brian Farrell, a partner at Ashford's law firm, and Donna Cox, the Waste and Recycling Manager at Brackpool Forest Council. So thank you for joining us today, and I'm delighted now to pass the floor over to you, Leanne, and look forward to listening to your overview of it. All yours.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Thanks everybody for joining. I think we've got a really great number of participants. I think there's nearly 200 joining us so far. So I am, as Charlotte said, just going to run through the sort of overview of the report, go into a little bit of depth on some of the key points. Hopefully you can see my screen share, but I'm sure somebody, okay, I'm seeing some nods. So yeah, so massive thank you to UK Green Infrastructure Week for letting us launch the report here. It's a really, really crucial time, I think, at the moment around sort of the waste policy landscape. And really with the movements towards separate food waste recycling and separate collections, it was really the opportune moment for us to develop a report that would really showcase the importance of these separate food waste collections, help those making the decisions around these separate collections really understand the importance of what the benefits are of the different measures that are out there. So as I've said, it's safe to say, I think everybody hopefully on this call and joining us today will know that we're entering a new era of waste management. From 2023, as Charlotte said, we're going to now be seeing a requirement for households, businesses, to start separating and presenting their bio waste, food waste, organic waste for recycling. And this really comes off the back of the Environment Act, which I know one of our co-speakers, Brian, will go into in a little bit more detail later. But essentially, just as an overview, what we're looking at seeing is that from 2023 onwards, there will be separate food waste collections required. And then going forward, there'll also be an exploration of a ban on organic waste going to landfill. But before I move on and go into it in a little bit more detail, I thought I'd just touch upon the quote from the Resources and Waste Strategy below. So there is a goal included in this strategy that at least 65% of municipal waste by weight will be recycled by 2035. And I think one of the really important, I guess, takeaway messages from here, and I'll close on it, is how food waste can help deliver these recycling targets. So I guess really I wanted to start on the why separate food waste collections are so important. We developed this report off the back of and sort of hot on the heels of COP26. I don't think you can safely go anywhere now without hearing the conversation around net zero and the importance of getting to net zero. And I think that's really been reflected in the way that over 300 local authorities have declared climate emergencies and net zero targets. And food waste is a really significant part of this. Everybody acknowledges both on a personal and professional level just how important their actions are in helping combat the impact of climate change. So as Charlotte said, we've got 3 key products that can be sort of developed and produced by sending food waste to AD: biomethane, biogas, bio-CO2 and biofertilizer. And these are all really intrinsically linked to some really heavy emitting sectors. So for example, transport, energy, heat, and fertilizer as well. And really AD, as part of its sort of waste management process, produces these and offers a low carbon alternative to them. And so often I think we picture waste management in silo, but when you look into the linked factors, actually it really does go beyond just a waste management. And I think just one more point to raise here is we're now moving. Net zero is of course incredibly important, but it also goes beyond that as well. And the role that food waste plays in terms of dealing with some of the other crises that are arising, so the energy crisis, rising costs of fertilizers, and the impacts on food security that this will have, transport costs, fuel costs, so all that sort of thing is all very much linked in. So getting into a sort of more of the where, food waste production, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware. So UK produces nearly 10 million tonnes of post-farm gate food waste each year. And this can come from a variety of sources, but actually households are they do produce the bulk of that food waste in the UK. So it's estimated around 70% of food waste is coming from households. And I think it's quite interesting working in this sector when you start to think about, as you're going about in your day-to-day life, producing some of the food waste in your own kitchens, whilst it looks like quite a small proportion, when you think about it all linked in with the overall UK picture, actually it starts to have such a massive impact, and households and local authorities have such an important part to play and have such a role really in making sure that we're capturing all that food waste and really making sure that we're dealing with it in the right way. So yeah, why, I guess also going into the why again, around sort of why it's important that we treat food waste properly. Historically, we have treated food waste in a rather linear fashion. So we produce the food we eat, we create the waste, and then it goes either into the ground or we burn it. And so methane, generally, a lot of methane emissions arising in the UK have come from the historical management of waste, bio waste and organic waste being sent to landfill. For those of you that aren't aware, food waste going into landfill produces methane, which in itself is a really highly potent GHG emission. And it's actually 86 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And so it's really important that we are ensuring that we're dealing with these wastes in a really in the right way. And I think what's really, I think really drives it home, and the importance of making sure that we capture as much food waste as possible is, you know, when you send an organic waste to landfill, it's not just there for a year, but actually the impacts and the emissions arising from those wastes going to landfill will see the effects of that for years to come. And I think the table on the right hand side really showcases just how lasting the impacts are of poor waste management. And so yeah, I mean, you can look at some of the inventories and you can see that the methane arising goes as far back as food waste from 75 years ago. So it doesn't need to, it needs to be directed away from landfill and away from other mitigating waste management processes immediately. So what are the options available? In the report, we've really gone into the sort of different options that are available. I know I've spoken a lot around the impacts of managing food waste through landfill and the impact on methane emissions, but also I've sort of briefly passed over incineration, but also that, you know, I think a lot of food waste is also being treated through incineration and energy from waste, and really this is a suboptimal route for these recycling, for food waste recycling, and in fact it's not classed as recycling, it's a recovery. It's managed by strict environmental regulation. It can be very expensive to send on a weight by weight basis. It also emits greenhouse gas emissions, and I think often in the conversation this factor is really overlooked, and it can really lock in cities into producing sort of high volumes of waste really to feed into these incinerators and energy from waste technologies. On the more sustainable side, we have composting, which is seen as a sort of a recycling, but a lesser valued recycling of all food waste. While it does produce a valuable fertilizer, it also produces carbon dioxide as the waste decomposes, and it does fail to generate any of the associated real benefits that AD actually has. So AD, as Charlotte mentioned in the waste hierarchy, is considered the most favourable, and really it's because it really takes those wastes, breaks them down into all the valuable co-products. It produces the renewable energy and mitigates those methane emissions. It recovers nutrients, so instead of taking nutrients on a more linear level, it goes through and really embeds it into the circular economy. So through the production of the organic biofertilizer, we can then start to see these nutrients and the food waste acting in a more circular fashion. It also helps for biomethane plants. We can also upgrade and produce biogenic carbon dioxide, which can then be used in the manufacturing industry, which also is a much low carbon alternative to current CO2. And it's also on a weight by weight basis the most economic. So again, in the report, we go into an overview of the carbon savings, particularly around the average local authority. As you can see here, so the average local authority, we estimate, has around 70,000 homes. And really by taking the average 17,000 tonnes of food waste disposed of annually each year by each council, we can really begin to use that food waste and mitigate up to 15,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent. And that's really through making the most out of those separate co-products. I think this is a really great graph on the right-hand side, which really puts into perspective the difference between the carbon emissions, the direct emissions, and then also the carbon savings. And then going on to the cost-saving perspective, again, the costs are higher processing these food wastes through alternative technologies, particularly when we start looking into going beyond the gate fees, but also looking at with the potential price of carbon and the income that can be generated through, again, these co-products. And through some internal modelling that we've done here, we estimate that by processing food waste through AD, the average local authority can save between 1.5 and 1.8 million on a weight-by-weight basis each year. I'm quite conscious there is a lot of content in the report, and hopefully I've gone through and given a real flavour of it, but there is a lot, and I would really recommend that you go in, have a look through the report, reflect on some of the messaging. I'm more than happy to talk through, but I'm also conscious of time. But I will like to sort of end on the idea and the concept of recycling targets. So we will be seeing more, more stringent recycling targets imposed on local authorities. And I think food waste really is the key to unlocking and really delivering on these recycling targets. The targets are on a weight-by-weight basis, and a lot of different reports that have been presented to government have really shown that by introducing separate food waste collections, local authorities can really drive up the recycling rates, with food waste taking such a large proportion of the weight-by-weight proportion of residual waste. So aside from the carbon and the cost-saving factor, it's also really helpful to help local authorities hit those targets. And one of the reports that was presented to government a couple of years ago really showcased that local authorities hitting those recycling targets and showcasing, the highest levels of recycling did so particularly through the use of separate food waste collections. So really whistle-stop tour, but I'd really like to thank you all for joining us today. My email address is there. Please do get in contact if you have any questions. I'm looking forward to the panel discussion later, but also just to let you know that the report is really part of a wider piece, lots of different insights piece. So if you are interested in any of the others, we can also share those with you as well. Over to you, Charlotte. If Charlotte is there. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, sorry,
Leanne,
I am.
Oh, she's there. And Leanne, you've got a few questions in the Q&A box and a few comments in the chat box.
Yeah. Okay. I can have a quick look through those if we've got time to answer them. There's a few questions and comments really about the separate food waste collections. Have the government now confirmed the requirement for separate food waste collections to start in 2023? And another one really around whether it slipped back to March 25. And I think these are really, really relevant questions. So in the consultation document, they set forward plans that would sort of implement separate food waste collections from 23 for those that are currently co-collecting, separately collecting, and then they've offered sort of alternative dates dependent on the type of waste management contract that local authorities have in place. We are still waiting for the response of that consultation. It closed in June last year, and I think I would agree that while a lot of the initial language in the consultation has been around separate food waste collections being implemented from 23. The language coming out of the net zero strategy and, you know, from other conversations that we're having with government, is that it does look like that they're sort of slipping a little bit, and that from 2025 is the language that's now being used. I would say from our perspective, from an industry and from a climate perspective, we still continue to push for the fact that separate food waste collection should be implemented as soon as possible to really deliver not just the carbon savings, but as Charlotte referenced, the reduction in food waste being produced in the first place. So just to round up that, we are still waiting on that government response. We're hoping it's due imminently, but I do worry that I've been saying that quite a lot over the past few months. So I'm sure people roll their eyes when I use the word imminently now. Just having a look. So with many people putting vegetable peelings, non-meat, fruit and veg into garden waste, largely and surely commingled collections with modern pre-treatment tech methods are more GHG efficient and sustainable than in-vessel composting or the open air windrow composting methods. Has Adva done a life cycle assessment to compare the aerobic versus anaerobic method? So I would say that really goes back to the point that one of the slides where we looked at the carbon savings, and I think really there is, whilst there may be some benefit in commingling in very, you know, potentially very rural communities, etc. Really, when you look at the whole life cycle, the impact that the co-products have, you begin to really see the value of anaerobic digestion and sending food waste to AD. I think, you know, we've got the digestate, the transport fuel, the potential to, and I know David is going to go into it in a bit more detail in his presentation up next, using the fuel to fuel waste collection vehicles. You've got linking in with energy security, production of heat, electricity, and I think that really that's, you know, you do really see the difference in the carbon savings when looking at it in that at that level.
Leanne, I'm slightly conscious of time.
Oh, sorry.
There are a lot of questions, which are excellent questions. So what I'm wondering is whether we move on to, I think David is next in the running, if I'm right, and then you can answer some of them in the chat, and then we can also leave a selection for discussion in the panel session. So perhaps you can be the moderator of which questions would be good to answer in the chat and which would be good to have a discussion about in the panel session.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Thanks.
Well, thanks, Leanne. And in that case, I'm going to hand over to you, David. David McKee is the CTO of BioCapital, which now operates a chain of food waste AD plants. So over to you, David.
Thank you, Charlotte. Okay, morning, everyone. I'm assuming that everyone can see the slides. Today, I'm going to talk to you about some of the coverage of not what could be done. It's more what we are doing and how we can help enable others within the industry or looking into the industry on the journey to both sustainability, energy security, and fertilizer management, which is becoming very more prevalent in today, where we face ourselves in the current status of our country. So basically, a bit of background on who BioCapital are. Formed in 2018 by Aquatics and Helios, BioCapital owns and operates anaerobic digestion plants throughout the UK. And as you can see from the slide, we're very geographically spread. The group currently operates 7 AD assets and producing 34 megawatt hours of energy annually. We have the capacity to treat 520,000 tons of food waste, and we treat 80,000 tons of agri feedstock as well. So that makes us one of the largest AD operators in the UK. Our purpose is for our anaerobic digestion expertise to make a real contribution to the UK's transition to net zero. We aim to lead the market with high-performing assets, working to the best industry standards. From our perspective, delivering organic waste from landfill and producing products that are sustainable and very much putting sustainable products into markets that are needed at the minute, not necessarily a good thing to do, but actually needed into society, is something that drives us. And it's very important in the transport sector, energy sector, fertilizer sector, and these things are all becoming very prevalent. As a group, we have a clear vision of responsible growth to achieve our purpose through innovative practices, and our vision is to continue to work towards a very circular economy. So just getting back to what I started off by saying, where do we find ourselves? Rising cost of fossil fuels, locked into spiraling cost of utilities, and a lack of energy security, and a reliance on commodities from other countries such as fertilizer. That's where we are. However, it is my belief that the anaerobic digestion of food waste can help us unlock these challenges and uncontrolled risks. Not only just helping us fight climate change anymore, but this is giving us a sustainable growth pattern and a more self-reliant future from where we sit today. So as well as being, as I said, hooked on fossil fuel energy, trapped by rising fuel prices, stuck in a chemical farming cycle, I believe fully that anaerobic digestion holds the key to unlocking a lot of these issues for us. As mentioned by Leanne, the food waste is a wasted resource. It's just put into the wrong place at the minute. And with a bit of help and direction, we can help allocate that food material as a resource into anaerobic digestion as a process. So instead of, as I said, talking about what we could do or what we should do, I thought it was important to help share some of the things that we are doing, and not only let people think that, oh, that's a pipe dream, couldn't work. It is happening within this group, and it is happening on a day-to-day basis through innovation, environmental entrepreneurship. But these things are actually happening in today's market. Granville Eco Park, who I want to discuss, I'm the CTO of that company as well. We developed a smart loop process, and it's our version of the circular economy. But that is actually set up to enable customers of ours to get into our smart loop. We believe that what we are doing is both ethical and sustainable, and we want to share some of our carbon dioxide savings and sustainable practices with others who want to get involved in it. So what do? Well, we take food or organic waste, and we process it through a process. We have the capacity to treat 90,000 tonnes per annum. The electricity produced is 40,000 megawatt hours, and that diverts 55,000 tonnes of carbon every year. We benefit our customers by replacing chemical fertilizer with digestate. We use biomethane for energy generation, but we also have put in a vehicle fuel point where we are actually now fueling our own vehicles, which moves both our digestate and feedstocks to our plant in Northern Ireland. So the beauty behind that is when we deliver food waste material to our plant, the lorry fills up and leaves again with biomethane in a more sustainable manner. And in the future, we're looking to use renewable CO2 in products or processes going forward. We don't believe that it's a catchy marketing ploy. This is a movement, and other customers that we are providing electricity to, be it food waste producers, industry, they are now taking the CO2 savings that and they're using it in their own marketing and development. This is giving us the ability to enable others to get a more sustainable future. So we have 3 Volkswagen biomethane maintenance vans. As I said, we purchased 2 bio-CNG Ivecos, which runs 100% in biomethane. There's no diesel alternative. There's no backup petrol engine, it is 100% biomethane. And that results in a CO2 reduction of 85% compared to diesel and has a range of 500 kilometers. They come with a 460 brake horsepower Euro 6 engine, offering particulate matter reduction of 99% and a NOx reduction of 80%. So each truck will be removing 125 tons of CO2 off the road every year, which is the equivalent of 1,250 tons over a 5-year period. So these aren't pipe dreams. This is actually happening now within the business. Warren's Emerald. This is based up in Newton Aycliffe in Northern England, where Warrens were a pioneer of this a number of years ago. They actually took it a step further, and they actually started to develop and purchase RCVs which run on biomethane. So the actual trucks that are collecting the food waste is actually fueled by the biomethane that product produces. Again, that gives a lot of comfort to the customers because they see the biomethane truck coming up, and the ethical nature of the business is driven through the customers which want to provide the food waste to them. So we find it opens a lot of doors, and people are now intrinsically aware of their carbon footprint. And if we can come along to help collect their food waste material in a truck like that, it gives them a great comfort of what they're doing with the material. But it's also ethically driven throughout the business that these are the type of changes that we want to see happen. And for councils and anyone else listening, you know, the cost of diesel at the minute is huge. Not only are you going to be driven to do, you know, to make changes anyway, but, you know, the cost of biomethane versus diesel at the minute, there's a 40% saving. So it's not just, oh, it's a good thing to do and it's environmentally friendly. There is now very much a financial driver to actually make this work as well. So the goal and outcomes of anaerobic digestion. As I tried to say at the start, there's too many presentations saying this is what we could do, or here's what we could have done. The message today is that this is what we are doing, and we were willing to help others on that journey with us, help share information, help develop business cases, and work with people as it is for the benefit of everyone. Fueling HGVs with biomethane can cut well-to-wheel emissions by 80% per kilometre compared to diesel. Under the updated Renewable Energy Directive, biomethane produced from food waste will be recognised as carbon negative, and Leanne has shown that in her graphs already. And biomethane fuel can present significant saving for customers compared to diesel, which can be as high as 40%. What's the catch? This is something I just don't get. Like, what is the catch? I feel the key message to council and local authorities is that this concept can enable them to hit the renewable energy targets and improve their environmental performance dramatically, as well as taking control of rising costs. So how do we move forward? As I said, higher levels of landfill diversion, provision of renewable energy in the form of electricity and heat, improving our national security, reduce reliance of fossil fuels and replace the vehicles fueled by an unused resource, which is indigenous and environmentally beneficial, and the reduction on reliance of chemical fertilizers. The digestate provides natural nitrogen, potassium and phosphorus, while also providing carbon to the soil and improving the soil health. So I just put up, this is our circular, this is BioCapital's circular economy slide from 2021. These are actual results which showed our businesses save 260,000 tons of carbon equivalent out of the atmosphere. And this is something that we're very proud of, but also something that we will hopefully improve on year as the business grows. Thank you all very much.
Thanks very much, David. That was really an excellent overview, and I think incredibly helpful to see AD in action. On the subject of AD in action, I think it'd be really helpful to now move over to Donna Cox, who's the Waste and Recycling Manager at Bracknell Forest Council, to see how you've been putting it into action from the local authority perspective. And then we can move to questions at the end of that. Donna, over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Morning, everybody. Just going to share my presentation for you all. Okay, so just a little bit about us at Bracknell, in case anybody doesn't know who we are. We are based in Southern England. We are a quite small local authority with just over 52,000 households. Our waste collection is carried out by Suez Recycling and Recovery UK, and our waste disposal is part of the RE3 partnership. And we introduced food waste collections in March 2021. Originally planned for October 2020, but unfortunately a small thing called COVID got into the way of that. So just moving on to our decision-making process of how we went through the process of introducing and agreeing what we would do for introducing food waste. So we were tasked with exploring the options for introducing a weekly food waste collection service. DEFRA had obviously published its intentions, and our recycling performance had plateaued over the last 4 years, so around 43%. We'd also looked at all of the top 10 performing authorities which collected food waste, and 8 of these had a capacity of less than what was our current 120 litres of refuse capacity per week. So we had 4 options effectively. The first option was do nothing. We would fail to meet the government recycling targets, risk fines, and potentially break the law if DEFRA made food waste collections compulsory. Option 2, to add food waste onto our current service. This would have a high cost, over £2 million. It would mean not all of our food waste is recycled. It would only prevent around 2,600 tonnes of waste going to landfill, and it wouldn't achieve our less than 10% targets of waste going to landfill. It would also mean that our refuse vehicles would be travelling around emptying bins that weren't full. Option number 3, to add food waste and downsize the refuse bins from 240 litres to 180 litres. Now, this has a very high capital cost in excess of £1.5 million. There are negative environmental impacts. The new bins are all made of plastic. There are vehicles required to do the changeover, and 180 litre bins can be operationally challenging. However, it would maximise the amount of food that's recycled, and it's actually what our neighbours at Reading Borough Council did. And lastly, option 4, to introduce a food waste collection service and change our refuse collection from 2 weekly to 3 weekly. This is the only option that generates a very small saving, but it would maximise the amount of food waste recycled and have the lowest carbon footprint out of all the options. We'd have one less vehicle on the road, the refuse vehicles would be travelling less miles, and there'll be no unnecessary waste in the wheelie bins. So the decision was made to introduce a weekly food waste collection service and change the refuse collection frequency from 2 weekly to 3 weekly for all households in March 2021. This would maximise the food tonnage. We carried out a waste analysis in 2019 and 2020, which showed us a breakdown of our refuse bins. 43% by weight were food waste. Around 20% could also be recycled at curbside or other recycling sites. So we knew if we pulled these items out, there'd be space in the refuse bins. As I said before, it was the only option to generate a small saving. It would also mean that we wouldn't be lagging behind our neighbours. So Woking Borough Council had already been collecting food waste since 2019, and Reading were starting on the 1st of February 2021. And of course, it responds to all public demands and obligations of food waste collection. So onto the planning stages. I can't underestimate or emphasise enough how much planning needs to be involved in a new service, particularly introducing food waste and changing refuse collections to 3 weekly. So please do not underestimate this for any councils who are looking to implement this. We, with a very brief summary, we had new routes and 5 new food waste vehicles. We had a lot of communications. We had a 6-week newspaper ad, social media campaign focused on frequently asked questions, e-newsletters, bin hangers to remind people about the changes, new web pages, contact forms. We had videos online to try and dispel myths and explain to people what would actually be happening. We had events booked, which again, obviously COVID scuppered that a little bit. So we had lots of virtual talks. And we had a robust plan of delivering our caddies over a 5-week period. So with our caddy deliveries, there'd be an outdoor caddy, indoor caddy, 1 set of liners, and a leaflet explaining the new service and the new schedule. And we also ran a food waste vehicle naming competition, which was fantastic. And we had a huge engagement with over 1,500 votes from our residents, with names such as Binderella and Hank Marvin, and my personal favourite, Dame Foodie Dench. Now, our communications team contacted Dame Judy's PA just to see if she was happy to give a statement at all. And she actually sent in a fantastic video, which I'll show you now.
I've been called lots of names and I played lots of people, but I've never been called Dame Foodie Dench, and I'm very proud to be so on the front of the food waste collection lorry. Thank you.
Which I think is just fabulous, and a bit of a free PR there. So thank you very much, Dame Judy, for that. So on to our challenges. Obviously, a change like this doesn't come easy and without any challenges. So before the food waste was rolled out, we had a few petitions roving about, which nothing came from them, but there was a negative response from our residents on social media and through our forms, majority for the 3 weekly refuse rather than the food waste collections. There's also concern about collection points for residents. Where would they pick up all the bins from? Would there be space for all the bins once we introduce the changes? So we had site visits to try and help them understand and check these areas where there may be problems. There was a delay in our liner delivery, so we had to order emergency liners. We had a few issues with caddies being delivered as well, where people claimed their caddies hadn't been delivered or they were broken. We saw several people posting on social media a picture of their caddy with dog food in, saying, "Thank you for my dog food container, Bratton Forest Council." So we weren't quite sure how many of those were genuine. But obviously it meant that we had to re-deliver lots of caddies. Our team were working on a Saturday to catch up, and some of the schedules that were delivered were incorrect. So having to make sure we had the right ones re-delivered to properties. We didn't also have enough caddies. There were more properties that had come on since the original October 2020 start date. And as I said before, caddies that were missing, misused or damaged had to be replaced. So we had to put on a rush order for that as well. And also a knock-on effect to other bin orders. So lots of people wanting second refuse bins or extra recycling bins for the extra capacity. And lastly, we were victims of our own success. So we had much more food waste being collected than anticipated, which meant that our crews were running around trying to pick up as much as they could, and we ordered a 6th food waste vehicle. But onto the positives, so the successes. We collected 111 tonnes in the first week, where it estimated around 75. We have consistently had an average of 2.8 kilograms per household per week of food waste. And in the first year, we collected over 6,000 tonnes, which is a huge amount compared to our estimations. We've also helped divert 3,719 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent from entering the atmosphere. And we've consistently had a high participation rate, which hasn't dropped off. Our recycling rate is on track to be over 50%. I think estimates now around 55, 56%, but don't quote me until we get the final figures. Our refuse has decreased and our recycling has increased. And there's also been a real shift in public opinion, with people actually contacting us and saying, "Thank you for the changes. I'm sorry we kicked up a fuss. It's actually working really well." So overall, it's been fantastic. And we've had such a great reception from our residents and the amount of waste that we've been collecting. And we were also shortlisted for the National Recycling Awards Food Waste Initiative category. And we have now been shortlisted as well for the LGC Awards in the Environmental Services category, which will be announced later this year. And we've been awarded an IESC Certificate of Excellence. And at the moment, we are currently working on introducing food waste into flats. So we've committed to introducing into up to 20% of our borough's flats, so around 1,800 properties. And our first set are due to go live next month. So watch this space and you can see how it goes. So thank you very much for listening to me. I'm not sure if there's time for any questions now at all.
Thanks very much, Donna. That was excellent. Can I suggest we move on to our final speaker, Brian Farrell, a partner at Ashford's, who's going to cover some of the contractual and legal aspects, and then we can cover questions at the end of that. So, Brian, can I hand over to you?
Hi, Charlotte. Yes, of course. Yeah, the juicy bit. You know, everyone's waiting for the legal bit, right? I like to pretend that to myself anyway. Yeah, thanks very much for having me here today, Charlotte, and the Advert team. I'm just going to share my screen here. So hopefully you can all see that. So yeah, my name is Brian Farrell, partner at Ashford's law firm. We specialise more broadly in the sort of resource management sector, so the waste and resource management sector, but also in clean energy. So our sector covers resource management and clean energy. So we're really across all sort of both collection and disposal, all disposal mechanisms, but also, like I say, the clean energy side of things as well. So delighted to be here with you today, and thanks again to ADBA for the opportunity. Yeah, we've acted for a number of local authorities. Just a quick bit about us. We've acted for a number of local authorities, both on the infrastructure contracts, so building out infrastructure, whether that's MBTs, MRFs, indeed energy from waste, but of course, pertinent for today, AD. We've done a lot of work in and around AD, and that's working on both, like I say, the infrastructure contracts, but also the collection contracts, so collection and disposal side of things. On AD specifically, though, we've done over 200 million of capex projects, or we've got over 200 of operational capex AD projects at the moment. Actually, I think it's around 250, and we act for all the investors, owners, operators, local authorities. We act for lots of local authorities on these projects as well, and that's on all aspects of those projects. And I sort of list out some of the issues there for the projects. I shouldn't really, they're not really issues, they're more opportunities, if I'm honest, and we're grateful to work very closely with ADBA on these. So I'll move into the sort of the meat of the presentation of my short presentation for today. So the agenda, I'll just jump straight in. I'm conscious of time for Leanne and Charlotte, so I'll jump straight in. I'm setting out some things here, and I appreciate that we've gone over these in a little detail. Leanne did a great job of summarising the timing. The timing, as Leanne was alluding to, the timing has been, there's been guidance or consultation around how and when this is going to be implemented, and the government has taken a bit of a, dare I say, a relaxed view, because they appreciate that lots of authorities have long-term contracts in place for their current collection and disposal routes. So they're giving a bit of leeway, if I can put it that way, for authorities to look at what they've got in place at the moment and bring these changes in a kind of cost-effective and efficient way. That's not to say by any stretch of the imagination that the government doesn't want you to, everyone to crack on with it. They do indeed, but they recognise that there are processes that need to be gone through. You need to look at the contracts you've got in place at the moment. For example, there in that table I have on the screen, that the second point down, long-term residual waste contracts, such as energy from waste contracts that you might have in place. They appreciate, obviously, that these are quite long-term contracts, and you might need to work out how to separate out this organic fines, the organic fraction, the food waste from waste, which at the moment is kind of going through those energy from waste outlets or disposal routes, I should say. So as I say there, the factors that are going to affect the timing of an implementation, you're going to have the legal factors. So that's looking at the contract you've got in place. What do they say? What do they allow you to do? Because of course, a lot of the time, local authorities will have a commingled waste stream, municipal waste stream, which includes all their organic fraction as well as the residual fraction, all in one black bag, which is going off to one disposal outlet. So of course, that is going to take a little bit of time to work through. And I think Donna set it out perfectly. They've been working on their own scheme for a little while. It's important that you do that and you do the work up front early on. And I'll come to that in just a second. My second bullet point there, the commercial aspects. Of course, there's always going to be a commercial aspect for any of these things. You've got to look at what's best commercially for the authority. And that plays into the point that I was talking about there a little bit, looking at what long-term contracts you already have in place. The logistical aspects, not to be passed over, Dame Foodie Dench, you know, we need to get lots more of those out on the roads, as Donna's doing. But vehicles not in short, you know, they're a bit of a tight supply chain for those at the moment. And again, government's recognizing that it's going to take a little bit of time to get the logistical aspects together to allow for food waste collection. So that's something they're mindful of. And then political. And I'm not going to guess which way the wind is going to blow. I think we can all understand that how politics plays a part in this. But we're certainly on a good going in a good direction at the moment. And no lawyer chat would be a lawyer chat if I didn't mention some legislation. So it is what we're all aware of, and Leanne's done a great job of sort of summarising this for us already. But very broadly speaking, what we're talking about here is separating out the food waste collection. So it's the recyclable household waste which needs to be collected for recycling or composting, and waste is it's recycled when it's treated or subject to a process which makes it reusable or reclaims substances from it. So AD for the organic fraction, the food waste element, is very much sort of satisfying that criteria that we're all driven to achieve here. So very much on the cards. And obviously for the local authorities among us, you know, the public contract regulations in terms of relevant legislation that we need to be aware of for this upcoming change or these changes. Obviously the public contract regulations are particularly pertinent because it dictates how we have to actually go about this procurement exercise, either changing the contracts we've got in place at the moment or looking at new contracts going forward. So I'll jump down to sort of the steps that we're currently working through and have been for a year and a half with lots of authority clients at the moment. So the first of these is the audit. So we've been carrying out lots of audits over the last wee while, like I say, and this is broadly speaking, looking at what the arrangements are in place at the moment. And this is really, really important. And again, it goes back to what Donna was saying there earlier. Look at what you have now, because you need to understand what you've got now and where you therefore can take things in future. A lot of the WDA contracts will have authority guarantees, and that's the first sub bullet point there. A lot of these contracts are going to have authority guarantees in them. So these are the contracts you have in place now. So the authority might be giving, for example, a guarantee around the CV or the moisture content, the composition of the waste, which a contractor is taking away for, you're always collecting and then taking away for disposal. If, of course, the authority then changes and takes the organic fraction, the food waste out of that bulk RDF, that residual residual waste, then of course that could impact on the CV or the composition of that waste, and you need to consider what impact that will have. Has the authority given a guarantee of that CV or the moisture content, like I say, or indeed the tonnage, like I've got there in the second bullet point? And if they have given those guarantees, what's the impact of changing them now? Is that going to mean the authority is going to have to repay some of the lost investment that your current contractor has made? The second bullet point down there that I have is the contractor targets, and Leanne, you touched on this briefly, but this is all about targets, and local authorities are driven to achieve targets, and that's the contractor targets is a big thing here. You need to look at what the targets are in your current contract, and biodegradable waste diversion is a key one in all the WDA contracts that I've done, the disposal contracts that I've done. They've all got biodegradable waste diversion targets. So that's diverting the organic fraction from landfill. Of course, if we're implementing these separate food waste collections going forward, it's a good deal easier for contractors. Sorry to all contractors on the line, but it's a good deal easier for contractors to actually achieve those targets because the food waste is being separated out. They no longer have to do it using trommels and Dano drums and other such instruments. So it's a lot easier. So perhaps authorities can look at maybe increasing those biodegradable waste diversion targets, and that will help them achieve their overall target objectives. Then the final point I've got on this slide is the contractor protections. So, and this I touched on this a little bit earlier, but have a look at your current contracts, see what they say around exclusivity. They might give your current contractor the exclusivity over all municipal waste arising in your administrative area. And if they do, of course, you need to look at what the impact of changing that will be. the bullet point under exclusivity, revenue protection. It could be that if you breach the exclusivity provision, so you take some of the food waste away from your current contractor, it could be that your contractor might have a right to certain recovery of revenue streams, for example, that they were expecting to receive. So it's just something to be aware of when you're carrying out this audit. The penultimate bullet point, termination rights, that kind of goes without saying, hopefully. Some of the changes might be based on what the overall contract does. If it's so significant a change, taking the organic fraction away from your current contractor, if that's what you choose to do, it could give rise to a termination right, and you obviously want to avoid those. And the final bullet point just on this slide is, of course, do take care to have a look at your change mechanism in the current contracts. See who has the risk of making the change. So I've just listed their change in law. What we're talking about here today is a change in law. So look at your current contracts to see who has the risk of that change in law. So if you implement the changes required due to this new legislation, who has to take the risk of that, the cost impact of it and implications of that. And it's not a particularly clean and easy to decipher in all cases. We've got a number of instructions on at the moment to try to get to the bottom of exactly where the risk is divvied up, as it were. So do take a look at that, because that will help you to understand, for the final slide that I have, how you move forward. So once you've done your audit and you understand what's in place at the moment, you obviously need to decide your strategy for going forward. And so, in moving forward, you're either going to be amending your existing contracts, perhaps. So that's working with your current contractors around bringing in the separate food waste collections, and also bringing in or introducing the separate or a different food waste disposal route if you're not already using one which satisfies the legislative requirements. Of course, I've listed there, you need to have a careful think about the procurement rules. Local authorities need to be careful about making what's called significant changes to any contract they have in place. If a local authority makes a significant change to a contract that is in place, it could trigger a new need to re-procure that contract. So you've just got to bear that in mind. And then the next point I list there is the contractor protection. So again, it's the point I made before. If you make a change to a contract, your contractor may have certain revenue protections, for example, that they can recover some of their lost revenues which have arisen due to the change. So again, it's something to bear in mind. That will hopefully come out of your audit stage. The second option, of course, is new contracts. So if you're not going to amend the existing contract to allow them to deal with the food waste, perhaps you're going to take the food waste away from your current contractor and re-procure it. So go out to the market. And I have to say there's a super number of merchant AED facilities out there that are competitively bidding for local authority food waste at the moment. And I saw some of the comments in the chat earlier, about some of the things that local authorities are asking for. They're asking for rebates, they're asking for super profit shares. So there's a real opportunity for local authorities to openly procure this in a very competitive market and get the best, the best deal for them out there, as it were. And of course, as I've listed there, you need to ensure that you're complying with the procurement regulations, goes without saying. Then the final sort of bullet point just above the conclusion, if you are going out to sort of bring a new solution in for your food waste, are you going to outsource it? So are you going to go and use some of the contractor to do your collection and your disposal for you? So perhaps they'll be putting it through an AED for you, or are you going to build your own? So, and when I say build your own, it could just be that you take back in-house the collection regime, of course, and still go out to the market for the disposal option. Like I said, there's a lot of capacity out there bidding for food waste, and we do need more capacity in the system, particularly with this new food waste coming to market. So again, that will all hopefully be educated by your audit process. So find out where you are in conclusion, carry out your audit, and that will help you to understand what the impact of the various different options that you have going forward. So that's all from me. So thank you very much, everybody. Obviously, available for questions.
Thanks, Brian. That was fascinating. I will concur with your comment about there's a higher demand for food waste treatment than there is food waste, so it's very competitive. I would just make one comment, though, that actually AD operators are providing a valuable service, and it's really important that food waste is treated well and that the products that come out of it are quality products. And in particular, I'm thinking of digestate biofertilizer. So please recognise that when you're negotiating commercially with the food waste AD operators, that there is a cost involved in processing to produce a quality product. So we are running slightly over, as I say, but there's still a lot of you with us. So are there any questions that we haven't yet answered, Leanne, or any more questions that people would like to raise at this point?
Yeah, there are quite a few questions, actually. There's been a lot of chat really around setting initiatives for local authorities and targets. And also, what ideas do you have to set incentives to local authorities and to demand recycling in AD facilities? Currently, and unfortunately, the regulatory focus is on collection and not on treatment. So I think this question is really asking, around what are the incentives to ensure that it does go to AD first and foremost. And I would say, I think it goes back to the waste hierarchy. And it clearly does demonstrate, and I have shared in the chat a link to the government guidelines and the RAP guidelines around sort of why AD should be the first route, but also the report will go into that. So that's just really a comment. We've had another question around how local authorities are tackling quality issues with food waste. I think maybe that's one for David and Donna. It'd be interesting to hear from both sides really on the best way of approaching the quality issue.
I don't mind picking up from the local authority sides. So for us, we have robust communication, so leaflets that went out with the initial rollout, social media on our website to make sure people know what they can and can't put in the caddies. And our waste collection crew also won't empty caddies and pick them up if they've got the wrong items in there. So from that side, we try and make sure that everything we actually pick up is correct.
Yeah, and just from the operator's perspective, it does help when you have a proactive council that makes that both educationary perspective, but it also very much focuses on the size of receptacle that the food waste goes into. Because if it's a larger bin, you will get larger items of contaminant, and like as an operator, you will get contamination. It's part of the business. You just have to find technical and operational ways of dealing with it. But the smaller the receptacle, the smaller the size of contamination that you will have to deal with. But from a Northern Ireland perspective, the local council is actually very good at providing that education and the smaller receptacle for
it. I've got another one actually for Donna around really some of the concerns around implementing separate food waste collections, and whether you're worried about the possibilities that if DEFRA press ahead with specifying a minimum service requirement, so for example fortnightly for residual collections, does that concern you, and are you worried that you might miss out on new burdens funding for food collections because you've already started them? And I think after Donna, maybe it'd be worth going to Brian to see if there's anything from a legal perspective there about accessing new burdens funding for those that already have those contracts in place.
So for us at Brentford Forest Council, we couldn't really afford not to start introducing food waste. The savings that we could make, and also public demand, the demand to help the climate change agenda. We don't know when the changes are going to be mandatory. We don't know how much, if it will be anything at all, the new burdens funding will be. So for us, it wasn't really an option not to do it now. We had to take it into our own hands and do something about it. For the minimum service requirement as well, again, we'll have to watch this space, but at the time, for us to introduce food waste, we needed something to influence people to be able to recycle as much as possible with the food waste, and 3 weekly collections is the only way that we had that would give us the savings and the tonnages and all the results that we needed, which has shown over the last year as well.
Yeah, I don't think, well, Donna's just answered it perfectly, to be honest. We don't know at the moment, actually. I think that, the hope is obviously, as Donna's outlining, that the savings have been worth doing anyway. But yeah, I mean, there's no clarity on it as yet, Leanne.
Yeah. There are so many questions. I think the questions are split between the chat and the Q&A box, so it's just trying to keep up with those. Another one for you, David, actually was around whether the food waste to landfill ban in Northern Ireland really increased the feedstock to AD plants, and whether it's actually affected the gate fees for AD operators. And
gate fees have been coming down. I don't think that was possibly not the ban. It was more COVID that had the massive impact on gate fees. The local authorities are actually doing quite a good job, predominantly going to composting through a mixed route, but some local authorities are segregating food waste and putting it available to anaerobic digestion. But there has been quite a drive, and it shouldn't be avoided. There has been quite a drive in the commercial and industrial sector within Northern Ireland that has, and that's private companies, private businesses who have set up separate food waste bins. Their only other alternative from that type of material, because it was so heavily packaged, would have been landfill. But because gate fees were so attractive and the avoidance of landfill at that time, we have seen quite a lot of pickup in the commercial and industrial sectors.
I think one thing to also add there, and again, we do explore it a little bit more in the report, is looking at how the different devolved administrations have backed up separate food waste collections with various policies, and looking at, and when you cross-reference them with the recycling rates, it's really interesting to see the difference.
But Leanne, it's so important, because you see, like, people need to actually have the guts to put the legislation in place, because when the legislation falls into place, then you can say to someone, actually, what you're doing is illegal. And then all of a sudden the shift changes. And that sometimes, like, I have to give commentary, and it's not too often I say it, and I know this has been recorded, but you do have to give such credence to the people who put that legislation in Northern Ireland in place, because it was before some of the rest of the UK, and they actually started to instigate the market. And it does become very important for driving business needs when legislation is driving it behind you.
Definitely, I completely agree. I think I was reading old policy documents that sort of suggested a ban on landfill, food waste going to landfill by 2025, and then this seems to have slipped back again to 2028. They're exploring the option now, and I really wonder whether we are going to see the ban on landfill coming into England sooner rather than later.
It's such a waste of resource, and like, now, and if the one thing that I tried to present today was that at this time we should be looking at all forms of resources that we have available to us: energy, self-reliance, to be humble in our own development, but to see how we can develop ourselves as a nation and become absorbed in our own way. Food waste is another resource, and if it doesn't get the backing to get it out of landfill, it's such a waste. It is such a waste.
I'm very conscious that we're now sort of 20 minutes over. So I don't know if Charlotte, we want to pass back to you. I know there's still so many different comments and questions. Yeah,
I agree. I think in the interest of time, I think we should say thank you to all of our participants, David, Donna, Brian, and of course you, Leanne, and all of you for sharing and participating in the webinar with us. A particular thank you to BioCapital and Ashford's for supporting the production of the report, which I hope all of you will find very useful. And lastly, a reference to the World Biogas Summit and Expo 22, which we are hosting at the NEC in Birmingham as I mentioned in the chat, there will be a lunch that we're hosting for local authorities and operators to further discuss all of these issues. So please do join us for that. It will be on the 15th of June at the NEC. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us. And I hope to see you on the 15th.
Thanks, Charlotte. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.